on stage. So Isabel, I just said that you're leading the strategy and transformation team at Accenture Accenture Song. Okay, so Accenture Song, which is, according to LinkedIn, and now I have to read it, it's the largest technology-powered creative group. Okay, so, and beyond that, you're also a member of the board of the GmbH. So for those who don't know it, it's the association of the leading German advertising and communication agencies. And there you're also the co-founder of the association's strategy collective. So you seem to represent a different, let's say, breed, maybe a more creative breed of strategists. So based on your understanding on strategy, based on how you feel what strategy is, what's your take on Sebastian's observations and ideas he just presented?
I want to start with maybe a little bit more background on what we do, because I think that will help also explain what a more creative breed of strategists means. Personally, my background is in creative strategy. I've worked in different agencies, working mostly on marketing, advertising, and communication strategies. I've also worked in tech companies like Google and Dropbox, and now since a year, I've started in Accenture Song. Accenture Song is the consumer group of Accenture, so everything we do is really geared towards customer experiences, be it in design and digital products, be it in marketing, commerce, and services. And that, I think, frames also what we do. You asked about my understanding of strategy, and I think that's also something that we discuss a lot in the strategy collective, because especially in the creative industry, strategy is a very diverse and broad field. We have brand strategy, we have people that look after campaigns and communications, social media strategy, we have design strategists, and so on and so forth. So there is a really broad spectrum. And similar to what you mentioned, we also use tools. I would say that's similar. However, I think there are two things that are a little bit different than what I would say kind of general business strategist or consultant would do. And the first thing is that everything we do really looks at humans first. When we think about communication strategies or brand strategies, it's really about how does this resonate with people? How can we make a brand, a product, a service relevant to people? And that really means getting this kind of really deep understanding of what's happening out there. And then the other is kind of the creative leap, as I would call it. So we're not just presenting a PowerPoint deck to the client saying like, this is what we found. Here are a couple of recommendations regarding, for example, how you can become more effective or efficient as a business, but really kind of also coming up with a creative solution. That could be a campaign, that could be a comms plan, that could be a product. So there's also always a creative element kind of diving into the solutions. So I think looking at what you presented, I think I would agree with all of the points. Sorry, no controversial opinion there. I think having kind of looking at strategy as a continuous process, I think was one thing that resonated very, very well with me. It's also something, especially in kind of the communications world, where things are moving very, very fast. Consumers are changing very fast. You have to adapt to that. It is something that's indispensable, right? We cannot come up with like one strategy that we then do for the next 3 years. It's important to be consistent, but it's also to be important to kind of go with what's happening out there.
Okay. So unfortunately, we don't have a controversial situation yet.
Sorry.
But let me please introduce also and bring into the discussion Paul. So Paul can be, let's say, Paul is basically the role model of what is often called a successful serial founder. And now again, I have to read it. So first you founded OLHub, which is a digital stock analysis application for private investors. Then you founded Liquid, a company I know very well, a digital wealth management platform for rather affluent investors. Then Plus2, I hope I pronounce it right, a team of tech founders engaged in digital consulting and venture building. And most recently, in 2021, you founded Recap, which is or can be described as a marketplace or platform where companies can trade their recurring revenues for upfront capital. So looking at your palmarès, Paul, you must do many things right when it comes to strategy. So as a founder, what's your perspective on what Sebastian just presented? And do you agree with his, let's say, overarching finding that strategy is broken?
Thanks for the intro. First of all, funny to also being introduced as a strategist. I think I would never describe myself that way. And also generally, like the whole keynote was somewhat funny in a positive way to me, because I mean, like roughly 10 years ago, I graduated from university, and then I jumped straight into startup land. So I do know Porter's 5 forces from university, but I never crossed them like in real life, so to say. So in fact, to me, it's more like I've never met that old type of strategy. But in fact, everything you said, I've seen in startup land more than once. Would I describe it as strategy work? Probably not. It's more like trying to survive. Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, it was always like you need to look at data. You need to have third and see this. You need to have a broader view to your competitors. I would agree with all of that, and I could actually not imagine operating a company and defining goals, just like saying I want to be somewhere 10 years in the future. It simply doesn't work. I mean, especially in the reality of a startup, where you typically, at least if you're VC backed and you don't earn money in the beginning, you have like, I don't know, if you're lucky, 2 years, and there is no way of just hoping that something will, based on a far distant idea, will work out. So generally, I would probably say I agree, but I wouldn't say strategy is broken. I've never met that kind of strategy. Let's put it that way.
Okay, no, not much of a contradiction either. So let me give you another try. So first of all, Sebastian, many thanks once again for your talk. I really appreciated it. And one of the things I really liked is when you described that looking only at your, let's say, closest competitors or at your close market when doing strategy is like driving on the highway, ideally with high speed, and just looking in the rearview mirror. And then a few slides later, you said that you think we should fix that issue with basing our strategies on data. So don't you think that this is a contradiction? Because let's be honest, when you look at data, the only thing you see is what already happened. So I would say focusing your strategies exclusively on data is really the, how is it called, the Inbegriff, the impetus, I think, of driving on the highway and looking in the rearview mirror. So how do you solve this contradiction?
Interesting point, and definitely a very fair point. I think the difference is if you, in the traditional way, however we call it, if we call it strategy or not, if you look at your competitors, then you have to rely on whatever your competitors actually report to the public. So most of the time you really look in the past like 6 months or 3 months or whatsoever. Looking at data, as we did with the Amazon job posting example, I think we could argue if that is past or present, because it is a job posting which is there today. It's a signal today. So I would say probably it's not the rear mirror, but probably the side window. It's not looking like far ahead, but I think it's a difference if you look at reports or at least at real-time data. I think your second part is super, super important, because that's why I stressed so much that you have to set up your hypotheses, why you're doing X, Y, Z, why are you going into this market, what do you believe, what is actually happening there, and this is something which cannot be derived from data, and I think this goes pretty much what you also said, it's a very creative part also of strategy, yeah.
I'd like to come back to this hypothesis thing, but you just say, so basically you're looking at data in order to better understand what is currently happening in order to kind of predict the future. Maybe you, Isabel, since you're working for this biggest tech-driven creative company of the world, how do you use data that you, I think, have, and how do you use data to describe what is currently happening, and maybe also how do you use it to describe how the future could be like?
So I must say I'm a little bit with you there. The kind of, I think, strategy, the way I look at it, the way we're doing it, has always been a little bit what you described, right? We're looking at a diverse set of data points in everything that we do. Again, be it brand strategy or marketing transformation projects, that can be the usual tools that everyone has access to, especially kind of on consumer behaviors. You know it as well from your past, Best for Planning, GWI, etc. We also do a lot of social listening, so really understanding what people are talking about, specific sentiments that they have regarding specific topics or brands. And we also, as Accenture, have proprietary data tools that we can use, for example, for benchmarking, things like that. So that's kind of the internal perspective. And then, of course, when we work with clients, we also do more complex data projects, specifically now when we look at generative AI solutions for marketing, that's where kind of it all comes together. So this is how we would use data. Of course, kind of also building hypotheses. I think you mentioned that as well. Kind of trying to figure out what do we think is happening, and trying to understand if this is the case, or if there is something else that we're not aware of. And then to the last point, looking into the future, I think if we think about forecasting or futuring, or I think there are several names for it, then it's about building scenarios, right? We're looking at different types of aspects. We're trying to figure out how could they develop, how could they evolve, and then from those different aspects, we're building scenarios, and we're going to look at likability, we're going to look at potential risks for clients, and potential outcomes, and from that we can then extrapolate a plan. But again, very important to kind of always go back, see if this is the case, if something has changed, if we need to change our hypotheses or change any aspects of the plan.
Okay, thanks. So most of the things you just mentioned, all the data points and the data sources, could be described as quantitative research. So
Yes.
I remember, let's say 20 years back in advertising agencies, it was always this mantra, hey, let's do qualitative research, let's go out, speak with the people. Don't you do that anymore, or?
No, you're right. I left that out. However, there's a little bit of an issue sometimes as well, specifically in the creative space. Clients don't like to pay for that anymore because it is a lot of work. And it also takes time and money, right? But obviously, it is very important to speak to customers, especially when we think about methods like design thinking or human-centered design. Really going out there, understanding what people are doing, ethnographical research. Those are parts of bigger projects. I would say in smaller projects, there's less of that. That's also why we're tinkering with kind of Gen AI to at least kind of get an opportunity to talk to specific types of consumers and get an understanding of how they would feel about certain things. So not a real deal, but some kind of proxy.
Okay, so then let's come back to this hypothesis story. So I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Sebastian, that all strategy should be based on hypothesis, and then as it's a process, then we can validate them along the way. So Paul, as a real startup founder, I assume all your business ideas and models are built on hypotheses. At least our investments in your companies are, so I assume you have the same hypothesis or similar ones. So, but how do you formulate them, and how do you validate them, and what do you do if you prove them to be false?
Yeah, quickly, if I may, to comment on qualitative analysis, I would actually argue that for young companies, if you are in a B2B space and look at large enterprises, the qualitative aspect is actually more important in the beginning. It's just like I see way too many founders who come up with vanity metrics based on, I don't know, 10 signups or so, which is barely statistically significant. And in that context, I oftentimes feel like just having an old school talk, sensing what your counterpart is feeling, sometimes actually even more important. So I strongly agree. Unfortunate to hear that that customers don't want to pay for it. I would encourage them to do that. At least for us, it's always been helpful. To your question, yes, it's always based on some thought of thesis. If it's aligned with the thesis of our investors. I don't know, maybe if they bought our equity story, I hope so. But yeah, the way I like to think about it is like basically a cascading approach. And I also like to start with a very meta thesis, some thesis that is so obvious that it only can be right. And in case of Recap, you introduced us, we finance companies, but the core thesis behind Recap is more company data is moving in cloud enterprise systems. Challenge me on that, I'm pretty sure about that. And it can be extracted via APIs, and we think you can make better financial decisions with that. That is kind of a starting point. Does it tell me exactly what I need to prove, what I need to do? No, but it is kind of a North Star that you can use to then get more specific and come up with actual thesis that you can validate and that you can iterate around. So for me, it also has like a calming aspect actually, because everything is changing all the time, and if you have at least one thing that is stable and you know that's what you're running after, that can help a lot. The second aspect, when it comes to validating thesis, it's also kind of obvious wisdom, but you just need to be sure that you formulate it in a way or have a certain KPI or other thing where you are certain that it's right or wrong in the end. So a bit like maybe an OKR methodology can be useful for that. And yeah, for us, ultimately, we have that very high meta thesis that is maybe on an even 10, 20-year horizon, and then we break it down to thesis for like a next financing round, for example, that could be like a 1 to 2 year horizon, and then you break it down to a quarterly set of OKRs, and that's basically how we try to measure progress and see if our thesis are right or wrong. So to sum it up, I definitely think thesis formulation is, especially in the early stages, but maybe also for later stage large enterprises, it's vital for success and helps to direct a company.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to slightly change the topic due to a very personal reason. So you presented, Sebastian, in your presentation that we should all get rid of this waterfall strategic logic, analysis, planning, execution, controlling, and instead follow a loop a little bit similar to strategy design or what we do at Project A, for instance, or Eric Ries's lean startup methodology. So, and really personally, I want to know, because I show this kind of loop at the beginning of each and every strategy project. And then, however, after 2 to 3 weeks, we are again in the worst waterfall logic, and team A is doing until end of the month this, and then hand over to team B that takes the job 2 weeks later. So how do you make sure in your project that this doesn't happen and you do follow the loop during the entire project?
Very interesting. I observe something different. What I realize is that if some people proactively say, and I heard this from clients, that they have this loop approach towards strategy, for them it means they never decide. They never say what their strategy is. They just do continuously strategy and think and rethink and think and rethink. And this is not a loop. This is waste of time. So if you ask myself how to do it, for me it's really, instead of finishing that strategy paper, and I think it needs to be finished. There needs to be a stamp on it where you say, this is today, on Friday, this is my strategy. And you need this. You have to put a stamp on it, whether it has your hypotheses, but it is the best it can get on that specific day. The question is, what do you do afterwards? And most of the companies take this paper and say, okay, let's now start, and this is the waterfall, the communication campaign and the implementation campaign, and. And after 3 years, we take it out from the drawer and see how the world has changed. And the loop for me is, okay, this is the best version we have today. Let's make very transparent why we came to our conclusions. And then tomorrow, we look at our conclusions and see if they have changed. We do not rewrite the strategy. We just look at our core, like the core hypotheses you just mentioned, Paul. If you realize on the next day that companies are not moving into the cloud, you should rethink your strategy, because a core hypothesis has been changed from yesterday to today. And this could happen. I mean, we're living in a world where also big things changed in the last 2 years, like global pandemic, war in Europe. So there are big things, big disruptions. And this is, for me, the core. You have to have 2 documents. The one is your strategy with a stamp on it. The other one is, this is the intellectual foundation. And then you don't challenge your strategy paper, you challenge your intellectual foundation on a daily basis. You can do it on a weekly basis, but not on a monthly or quarterly. And you can make it in an easy, I don't know, red, green, yellow slide. And when you see, okay, if 50% of my assumptions change the color, then I bring in the smartest people again and rethink the strategy. And you don't know if this happens after 3 days or 3 months, 3 years or 3 decades. And this is for me a continuous loop.
Okay, I'll try this out beginning next week. Okay, so and then
if you need help, let me know.
Yeah, I'll call you. I have your number. Okay,
sure.
So and then another thing you said that, and I think we all couldn't agree more, that the disruptor rarely comes from, let's say, within the market. So it was camera manufacturers for Kodak and Netflix for the video industry. So, but now, how do you make sure that the potential disruptor is covered by what you describe as the ecosystem? So you said, hey, okay, don't look at the competition, look at the ecosystem. But how do you make sure that, how do you define the ecosystem? Who's in, who's out?
Super, super relevant question. First, I think the ecosystem is very specific per company. So we worked for like 6 different insurance companies doing different strategies, and the ecosystem per insurance company was always different. I'll give you a very straightforward example. When I worked for Lufthansa and leading the Lufthansa Innovation Hub, we had exactly that question. We said, oh, there are so many startups and some are relevant. And it was very hard to define the ecosystem for Lufthansa, because Lufthansa says, well, we are in the business of aviation. We said, okay, but aviation, this is an artificial word. There's no market for aviation. What is aviation? And then we actually asked ourselves, what are the markets or what are the jobs to be done? What are the problems you as a company want to solve? And this discussion helped that then Lufthansa decided, okay, this is actually not aviation, but there is travel. Because within travel, you have personas, you have problems, you have desires, etc. And then they said, okay, within travel, this is a set of jobs to be done which relate to our company or our future ambition of our company. And by analyzing these jobs and these problems, this then defines the ecosystem you are part of today or you want to be part of in the future. But it's 100% specific per company.
Okay. Thanks for that. I would have a ton of more cards, but I was just informed that time is unfortunately up. So thank you once again, Sebastian, for your truly inspiring keynote. Thank you, Isabel and Paul, for joining us here on the stage, on the panel. And I hope you stay a little bit longer, as there are still some very interesting keynotes coming up. And if you want to continue the strategy discussion, just come to us. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
Thank you.